If I told you we were going to fix your struggling team with more tracking, you'd probably quit this episode faster than DSPs are leaving most agencies. Tracking feels like extra work, right? Like the never-ending paperwork abyss. But here's the behavioral science reality. What gets tracked gets done. And the right kind of tracking isn't about micromanaging. It's about making the job easier, smoother, and yes, even more fun. Hello, difference maker, and welcome to IDD Leader, the podcast that's all about helping human service organizations retain and grow their workforce using behavioral science. I'm your host, Nate Beers. Let's dive in. Today, I'm going to discuss how to turn around a struggling team with the data trick they won't hate. Most struggling teams are tracking the wrong things. However, if they start tracking the right things the right way, they can leverage the power of behavioral science, and then suddenly the team sees increased morale, better productivity, the complaints drop, and the sense of teamwork rises. Well, you probably are aware. Most teams feel like they're probably already drowning in compliance tracking. They're tracking meds. They're tracking time cards. They're tracking the daily logs. They're doing the health data. They're completing all kinds of different checks. All of these things are good. They're there for reasons that should continue. But struggling teams, yes, they feel like they're drowning perhaps with all this compliance, paperwork, and data, but they're often not tracking leading measures. These are the behaviors that actually drive success. They're tracking a lot of outcome data because they have to, but if they would look at some of the things that are happening before that lead up to the successes, they'll find that actually things take a turn for the easier. We could kind of compare it to weight loss. If someone is just tracking their weight every day, that might motivate them possibly to eat differently or start exercising or whatever. But just tracking it or watching their weight go up or stay the same and hoping for the best, it doesn't really do anything. Whereas if the same person were to start tracking their workouts or to track their meals or their menu planning, those would be leading measures that then the weight will take care of itself as long as the right behaviors are being, done beforehand. So let's apply this right away starting with frontline supervisors. So for frontline supervisors, as an example of how to apply this principle, we would just look at implementing self-tracking. So let's suppose you meet Sam. Sam's a frontline supervisor. He's too busy to track his own follow-through, but somehow he has time to write up the same staff over and over again or complain about it, these kinds of things. Well, there's a really simple solution that has to do with tracking. Have Sam start to track just one thing. Besides all the things he has to for compliance, of course. Have him track whether he actually follows up on the issues he discusses with staff. A simple yes or no checklist would be fine. Every time he's meeting with one of his staff for a one-on-one supervision, make sure there's an action item that he walks away with. And maybe there's no action item, but if there is, that he has his to-do list. And then he has one simple checklist, which is, did I follow through with this? And pretty soon, there's going to be this magical, it's not really magical, it's just behavioral science thing that happens. He's going to be, as he's self-tracking, especially then if he brings this to his supervisor or his boss, the self-tracking accountability put together, he's going to see his own behavior patterns. And in doing so, he might find out that he's actually addressing about half of the issues that come up at these one-to-one supervision meetings, which, that's a lot more than none. But maybe he's never following up and letting people know. So maybe that's the breakdown. Or maybe that other 50% is actually kind of kicking his butt. Like he really needs to be doing much closer to 100% of the follow-up because people are counting on what he's saying he's going to do. Here's the big takeaway. When supervisors track their own behaviors, and it wouldn't have to be that, but pick your leading measure that's relevant in your situation. When they track their own behaviors, then they begin to model what they're expecting from staff, and they get better at their jobs. Now, let's talk about DSPs, or whatever your frontline staff is called at your organization. They're probably very used to tracking compliance types of things with medications, they may be sending in a daily, they're probably filling out daily case notes or daily logs. They may be having some kind of communication binder going back and forth between a day program and the home. There's all kinds of things they're tracking. But what if they tracked the behaviors that actually made work go better? Let me give you some examples. So instead of just tracking their time card, which of course they would need to do that, what if they track their own tardies or their own call-offs and their own wins? So this would just be adding two things of tracking. On the one, it's kind of a negative behavior, something that you'd want them to reduce, but it's kind of like the speed limit signs where it says your speed is, and it has a speedometer and it shows you your speed. And if it's put right next to a speed limit sign, it just brings that self-awareness that a lot of times if someone's struggling, they're living very much in the moment, or they're dealing with a lot of drama or challenges in other aspects of their life, they might not really be paying attention to how many times they've called off or how often they're tardy. And yes, a supervisor can initiate and should initiate that conversation, but even just having them start to track it for themselves can be a powerful tool to become more aware of what they're doing. Then, what about tracking their own wins? What do I mean by that? Well, they could just track one thing. In addition to the tardies, one more thing would be, and this is the one positive thing, what did they do to provide person-centered care today? Or make it even less fluffy sounding. How did they help a client have their best day? This could be that they engaged in the client's favorite game, or they took the individual or a group of individuals on an outing that they know they'd wanted to go on. It could be that they, had the individual help with the menu planning for the next week's dinners, or whatever. It could be 100 different things, but where they specifically did something to best serve the client. And if they started tracking that, a simple little thing, they could do these self-reported behaviors on, they could do it on like a personal scoreboard, or maybe you can even embed it into some kind of tracking you already have working at your organization. But the power of these self-reported positive behaviors is that, no one wants to admit their failures, but they love sharing their successes. And so on the one hand, they're tracking their call-offs, but as long as that number is low enough, then that actually is a win. They're saying, hey, I only called off, one time in the last 60 days. That's not bad. And then they're reporting their wins about how they've been helping the clients in little ways of going above and beyond, things like this. So when staff track and report their own progress, they become more invested in doing the right things. And it's a simple little tool, but it's very powerful. Let me talk for a minute about why this works, the behavioral science behind it. There have been lots of studies on the power of self-monitoring, which is when someone's tracking their own behavior, and how that alone influences behavior. However, when self-monitoring is paired with feedback, which is then they're monitoring themselves, but then there's going to be a conversation, or there are conversations about how it's going, and someone is giving them feedback on that performance, then it's a very powerful tool to change behaviors. I'm trying to think. I would say it's almost like if you have a Fitbit or you're tracking your steps with whatever device you use, just tracking the steps alone often will increase how many steps someone takes. But then if that was at all going to be connected with a health coach or somebody checking in with you about your steps, and you know that you're going to be reporting on the progress you're making on those steps, it is all the more powerful in influencing how much walking or how many steps you're taking. And this kind of brings up one other point that's worth really noting here, and that is if staff yes, they're being asked to track one or two more things, But if it's paired with reinforcement, so that yes, the feedback, but then reinforcement or rewards where they're getting recognized and celebrated for the progress they're making, then it won't feel like a burden. It will actually feel like a blessing. It will feel like something that's adding value to them. But it's crucial that frontline supervisors, that they take the time to recognize the progress and to celebrate the wins that their frontline staff are making. Just like if a supervisor was going to start tracking their own follow-through, their boss or their manager it would be very important for them to celebrate the progress the frontline supervisor is making. So it's just the same principle applied at every level through the organization. Now, let's talk a little more on how would you implement this at your organization. I'd recommend you just keep it simple. Just have 1 or 2 checklist items per person. 1 or 2 for frontline staff that you're adding in, frontline supervisors, and 1 or 2 for frontline staff. If you can embed it into existing workflows or paperwork, that would be fantastic. I think having whatever supervision form you're having would be a natural place for the supervisor to be tracking their own behavior as it relates to following through. And then for DSPs, maybe you need to create a new form for this, or maybe there's a spot that you can just add it into where they're just putting on their daily or weekly checklist of what they did to serve the clients above and beyond, or to provide person-centered care, or whatever it is behavior that you want to track for them. If there's an issue where there's a struggle specifically, like if bed checks, if how staff are doing that and how it's written in the policy aren't aligned, obviously that's a health and safety issue. But you could even just start to embed that into not just the do this or else you're going to get fired, but you can also have it where you're creating wins around it, and staff are tracking their own, not just in a system that then they never look at again, but where they are tracking their own behavior as well. And if they already have to track the bed checks, then it'd be as simple as checking off one more box somewhere that they are keeping track of. The key here is that they can refer back to it, that they're seeing it, and that they're seeing their own progress over time. So it's not just going on a computer that then they're never going to look at in some kind of a health management software or things like this. Okay. The other big piece of it, and I've already kind of said this, but just reinforce the process. As in, give public shout-outs, give small rewards. You could even gamify it, create a leaderboard for those that are getting ahead in their trainings, or that are moving fastest towards e-badges on the DSP credentialing, or again, whatever's relevant in your organization. But the key with that, so you're rewarding the as they're engaged in the behavior, but you also are rewarding that they're tracking. In other words, it's almost like if you were doing a point system, you get a couple points just for filling out the point system checklist or whatever it is. The process itself has to be celebrated, along with, of course, the progress and the behavior, the best practice behaviors they're engaging in. And the more it can be a game and not a chore, the better. So they're not just filling out another form. They're competing in the DSP Training Olympics. Or, okay, that's pretty cheesy, I have to admit. But, hey, sometimes cheesy is good. I happen to be a big fan of certain cheesy things because it just inserts fun into the mix. And that is a powerful tool. Gamifying and adding fun in the mix is a powerful tool in and of itself. Probably worth talking about more than the scope of this particular episode. So what happens over time is that supervisor check-ins aren't just compliance crackdowns or trying to catch people from falling to the bottom, but it becomes a place of like a coaching session where the supervisor is cheering on their direct care staff on how far they can take it, or how well they can perform, and how the wins that they're having. Oh, you beat your best time. It's not exactly a race, but this kind of idea of, look, last month you did 5 special outings or games, or you did thoughtful things for the clients 5 times. Let's aim for 6 this month. That would be amazing. And really, it kind of comes back to this mindset shift that tracking is not about control, it's about clarity. When people know what matters, they're much more likely to do those things. And if it matters, it needs to be getting tracked. So the goal here is not to catch people messing up, but to empower them to succeed. And this is where I want to take us to the one next step, your practical next step from this episode. I would say it's this: pick one leading measure to start tracking today. Even before you have any kind of a reward system in place, if it's not already in place, even before you figure out all the details of how everything's going to work, just pick one leading measure to start tracking today. And then figure out the rest as you go based on the principles that we're talking about here. And communicate that to your team as soon as possible. And especially to anybody that you're overseeing where their team is struggling, especially you want them to pick something that's a good leading measure. Because tracking these behaviors does not have to be just one more thing or just one more piece of paper, but it actually can be a joy instead of a burden. And that's the goal here, is to get people excited about engaging in best practices so that the individuals you serve win, that your staff wins, and that your whole organization wins. And in the end, this will reduce your turnover, which, of course, is what this podcast is all about. Now, last thing before we wrap up, I have a free gift for you. It is a PDF you can download. It is the top 10 questions to help you solve DSP turnover. You can find it at iddleader.com/top10, TOPTEN, the word 10 spelled out, and it's yours free. I'd love for you to have that, and I hope that it helps to spark things in your organization as you are getting more and more strategic on how to stop this turnover train and instead get the retention bus moving forward. And Difference Maker, it's been a delight to share this with you. Until next time, here's to you. Keep up the amazing work.